Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's Top 10 Star Trek Bajoran Episodes. In this video, I look at episodes from Star Trek Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager that involved and are centered around the Bajorans and count down my top 10 favorite as well as my 5 least favorite Bajoran episodes. For the purposes of this countdown, I look at episodes not necessarily for how good they are overall, but I look particularly at the Bajoran storyline in these episodes and how well they're used, the Bajorans in the episode. And to count down what are, in my opinion, the best and worst Bajoran episodes. So let me start by counting down my bottom 5 least favorite Bajoran episodes, so the worst uses of the Bajorans in my opinion. Starting with my number 5, Past Prologue. This was the second episode of Deep Space Nine with some shallow and cliched use of Bajoran terrorists as they react irrationally to destroy the wormhole. This storyline would very rightfully be abandoned and replaced with better ones in the future. Number 4 is The Darkness and the Light, a boring and uninteresting episode that needlessly kills off some interesting Bajoran characters in a cliched plot about a Cardassian with a grudge against Kira and killing off all of those in her resistance groups. This episode was boring, uninteresting, and frankly I'm at a loss on why it exists in the first place. Number 3 is Crossfire, a cheap soap opera of an episode that shows Odo obsessing over Kira when she receives a visit from her boyfriend who just so happens to be the First Minister of Bajor, which features a throwaway plot about an assassination attempt on him, which is just a half-assed attempt to make the soap opera storyline more intriguing, and it fails miserably. The number 2 worst Bajoran episode is Progress. This is probably one of the most boring episodes in the entire Star Trek franchise. I see what they were going for in this episode by trying to make an analogy of big government agencies or corporations forcing people out of their homes for financial reasons, but this episode was far too on the nose about it and didn't go about it in a smart or roundabout way as Star Trek is ought to do. And plus, that guy was just annoying. I didn't find him endearing. I just didn't give a damn if he lost his home or not. I just didn't want to see him anymore. And the number 1 worst Bajoran episode is Wrongs Darker Than Death or Night. Ironically, this was also my number 1 worst Cardassian episode, and that's because this is just not a good episode. One of the worst uses of time travel in Trek, where Kira travels back in time to see if her mother had an affair with Gul Dukat. Really? That's what you're going to use time travel for? And the whole plot of the affair was ridiculous in the first place. There was enough history between Dukat and Kira. Adding an affair in the past with her mother was just completely unnecessary. And also this episode gives us a boring and repetitive look at the occupation that was done much better in other episodes. This episode was just useless and a travesty, making it my number 1 worst Star Trek Bajoran episode. So that's enough of the negativity. Let me now get into the best Star Trek Bajoran episodes, but before I get into my top 10, let me name a few honorable mentions that didn't quite make my list. First honorable mention is Nothing Human, the Voyager episode that more focuses on a Cardassian hologram the Doctor uses to try to cure B'Elanna, but it also features a storyline about a Bajoran officer who has a moral objection to the use of the hologram, who is a Cardassian scientist who killed and tortured Bajorans in his experiments, thus making the knowledge the Doctor is using tainted, which brings up a very interesting moral dilemma. Next honorable mention is Covenant, the Deep Space Nine episode where Dukat kidnaps Kira to take her to a Bajoran Pal Wraith cult, which was an interesting commentary on dangerous men and how they can manipulate people into joining a cult against their own best interest. And the final honorable mention is The Collaborator, which follows Vedic Wynn's attempt to discredit Vedic Baral as a collaborator, which surprisingly is successful, but mainly because Baral was covering for Kaiopaka. This was a touching episode of political intrigue that ended in a way no one saw coming, with Vedic Wynn becoming Kai. So now let me get into my top 10 favorite Bajoran episodes, starting with my number 10, Accession. This episode sees Sisko meet a man from Bajor's past centuries ago who claims to be the emissary, a title Sisko is all too eager to give up until he realizes doing so has dire consequences, to which he changes his mind and then discovers the prophets only sent the man to him in the first place so he could realize his true position as the emissary to the prophets, which is the turning point in Sisko's journey. Next is my number 9, Ensign Ro, the Next Generation episode that introduced the Bajorans in the first place, in a fascinating tale of political intrigue where Picard doesn't know who to trust and must ultimately rely on a disgraced ensign to uncover a conspiracy in Starfleet's own ranks involving Bajoran terrorists and a Cardassian plot to use Starfleet to take care of them for them. Moving on to my number 8, Shakaar, an interesting episode where we meet the members of Kira's old resistance cell as they all band together when Kai Wynn also becomes the first minister of Bajor and proceeds to a total mess and nearly starts a civil war. It was a great look at Bajoran politics as well as very nicely exploring Kira's character and her past. It was great to see the Bajoran people come together to avoid another disaster, and this disaster being Kai Wynn. Next is my number 7, which is Necessary Evil, where we get flashbacks to the station during the occupation where Odo first met Kira and trying to navigate dealing with the Cardassians and Bajorans while investigating the murder of a Bajoran shopkeeper. While in present times, Quark's life is put in danger by a Bajoran who's looking to blackmail other Bajorans. It was a great, intriguing episode that looks at the Bajoran mindset, past and present, and explores all facets of Bajoran society, but through the eyes of the outsider Odo, and this was done quite nicely. Coming in at number 6 is Duet. Now, typically, this episode is number 1 on any of the lists I put it on because, as I stated multiple times before, this is my all-time favorite Star Trek episode. However, this is more of a Cardassian episode than it is a Bajoran episode, as it centers around a Cardassian file clerk who felt guilty about the occupation. However, I think this episode deserves a mention on this list because it does touch on powerful themes of the Bajoran occupation, how it affected the Bajoran people. We see through Kira's eyes how important avenging the occupation is and the atrocities that they suffered, but more than that, this episode touches on hate crimes from the Bajoran side where a good man was killed just for being Cardassian. So a significant episode exploring the Bajorans. Moving on to my number 5, which is Rapture, where Sisko discovers an ancient Bajoran artifact and shortly after starts experiencing visions from the prophets, where the line Sisko walks between being a Starfleet officer and a Bajoran religious figure is put to the test as he makes an unlikely alliance with Kai Wynn of all people in order to explore these visions while Bajor is on the cusp of joining the Federation. This was a great, more mystical look at the effects the prophets or wormhole aliens has on the Bajoran people, and more specifically Sisko's role in all of this, and it was simply fascinating to watch. Coming in at number 4 is Life Support, which tells a very touching personal story of Vedic Baral at death's door, who is risking his life in order to ensure a peace treaty between Cardassia and Bajor. But this was a more touching story for the personal story of Kira having to watch someone she loves die for a greater good, and this is fleshed out even more by the addition of Kai Wynn, who's all too happy to exploit Baral's death for her own political gain, ultimately an overall powerful episode. Next is my number 3, In the Hands of the Prophet, the episode that first opened up the political world of Bajor by introducing us to characters like Vedic Wynn and Vedic Baral as the conflict to fill the void left behind by Kaiopaka heats up. But more than that, this episode makes great social commentary as it starts with the story of Vedic Wynn complaining about science being taught in schools because it interferes with her extremist religious beliefs. Very relevant, which we learn she's just using as a smokescreen to gain more power. very relevant, as it's proved that she doesn't really believe what she's saying and is just using her devoted followers to further her own ambitions. Again, very relevant. And not only that, but it shows Sisko and Kira struggling to prove how strong the bond has become between the Bajoran people and their Federation counterparts. So next we get to my number 2, The Reckoning, the episode that took the mystical conflict between the prophets and the Polaris to its highest point, as Sisko was asked to sacrifice his own son in this epic conflict where Kira's faith was proven to be as high as she claimed, as she was more than willing to sacrifice her own life for the prophets, while Kai Wen was exposed as the fraud that she is, and while she claimed she stopped the fight in order to help Sisko, it was really because of her own shame, proving that a human had stronger faith in the prophets than she did. And finally, we get to my number 1 Star Trek Bajoran episode, which is the 3-parter, The Homecoming, The Circle, and The Siege. So first off, no, it's not a cop-out to have 3 episodes as my number 1, as really this tells one story, and I think to try to separate them would be unfair. And secondly, this was just the ultimate story in the Bajoran storyline, which is why after these episodes the Bajoran storyline wasn't touched on that much again, because this 3-parter wrapped it up nicely, and to try to do another Bajoran conflict like this would just seem like a rip-off of this episode. This 3-parter wraps up all the inner conflict that has been building on Bajor for the entire first season, as a civil war breaks out, and the stakes involved includes having Starfleet's presence on Deep Space Nine, and even the Cardassians returning for a second occupation. And the personal stories and political intrigue weaved throughout these 3 episodes only enhanced it, as we also got the strength of the Lee Nallis story, a war hero who doesn't feel he deserves to be a war hero, learning to fit that role in order to help the people that need him to have that role for the betterment of Bajor. And seeing his personal interactions between Sisko and Kira was simply amazing. And on top of that, we got a great villain in the Oscar-nominated actor Frank Langella, playing Minister Jaro, the most devious, power-hungry politician ever seen on Bajor, and his inclusion in the story only made it more glorious, making this my number 1 favorite Star Trek Bajoran episode. So that's it for my top 10 Star Trek Bajoran episodes. Be sure to check out my channel for many more Star Trek videos, including my episode reviews, which I'm taking requests for. So if there's an episode from any of the 5 Star Trek series that you'd like me to review, just leave a comment with the episode you'd like me to review, and I'll endeavor to do so. Also, be sure to check out my channel, as I do many more videos on other shows like Game of Thrones, Dark Matter, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.